Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this episode 6 of Primal Live, with myself, Jody Dighton, and my co-host, Christine Bailey. Welcome, Christine. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Jody. It's always great to see you.
Oh, it's great. Lovely sunny day today. Getting some vitamin D finally. I'm really happy when the weather's kind of picking up. It seems to increase my mood immensely.
Well, it's interesting because as you probably know, I was in San Diego last week for the Institute of Functional Medicine. And of course, it was so sunny there. And it's really interesting how it not only lifts people's mood, but, it gets them out exercising as well.
Oh, it gets everybody out. And the kids are more happy to get outside and play in the garden. It just has such a massive impact. It's unbelievable. This time of year, everything just seems, the glass is always half full this time of year. Everything seems to improve.
And did you know, actually, because we're talking about gut health, that vitamin D is really crucial for your gut? Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely vital. So there's been a lot of good studies now on vitamin D receptors being present in a lot of our immune cells, our lymphocytes. And what it does is it helps to actually what we call modulate the immune response. So it actually can dampen down inflammatory markers and lower inflammation. But it's also very important for the gut lining, to heal the gut. So one of the things we always recommend people do is get more sunlight.
Which is so difficult living in the UK when it's so, difficult to necessarily get access to. I know we're doing gut health, but just as you brought that up as part of gut health, does sunbeds have the same impact?
Sunbeds don't really have such as dramatic impact, but they will improve levels. But the studies don't suggest that they improve it as much because they're a limited number of different rays. So it's not quite the same. But also, I think from a health and well-being point of view, being outdoors is just as important as being exposed to the sunlight. And again, a lot of good studies about, even things like walking barefoot can have quite a profound effect on our health and well-being, being connected with the earth, being in nature, in terms of what it does to our cortisol levels and stress and cortisol can have a very negative impact on our guts. So by spending more time outdoors, by being immersed more in what I call proper environment and nature can actually have a lot of knock-on effects, which makes it much more beneficial.
It's terrible. All I can think is, God, that would be great. Get the kids outside barefoot. And my next thought is, what if they step on something?
Oh, well, I mean, it partly depends on whether you've got cats and dogs and things like that. But
I mean, like in the woods. I'm thinking the woods.
Oh, I see. Oh. When you were young, didn't you do it? I did it.
I did all the time. And you know what? I almost sliced my toe off once. I running around because that's what we did. You ran around outside. You didn't put your shoes on and yourself. You just ran around outside playing tag and hide and seek in the neighborhood. Everybody did.
And in some ways, that goes back to one of the other sort of thoughts and strains about, allergies and immune system is if you are more exposed, particularly as a child, to the microbiome outdoors, because we have there's microbes everywhere, you develop much more of a tolerance to a lot of these pathogens and allergens. So, hay fever, dust, pollen, all of those sort of things. When you look at particularly people in the countryside, their range of allergies is much less. They're exposed from the day go. So the hygiene philosophy is still very, very relevant in terms of how our immune system interacts with us and the environment around it.
Oh, interesting. Oh, excellent. Listen, I'm going to pause back very quickly, do a quick little chat, and then we are going to talk about gut health today, which is a huge topic. So this is going to be a topic that we're going to spread over today's blab and likely our next blab as well, because there's so much coverage on this constantly in the press at the moment. There's a lot to be said about this. You've got a book on this. Yeah. We've got a seminar coming up at the shop. So just quickly to talk on events coming up. Christine, do you have anything that people can be looking towards coming up soon?
Well, in terms of what's coming up, there will be a couple of public shows like the Allergy and Free From show. which is coming up in London Olympia, and then there will be a Liverpool show coming up as well after that, where I'll be there either doing talks and cooking demos as well. So that's a definite one for people to come to, because it's effectively a free event. To get your tickets, just go onto my website, and we will be posting a link soon, and that way you are definitely going to get your free tickets. So come along to that. I think that would be a great one.
Excellent. And we have you at the shop on this Wednesday. We have a full house. So Christine will be talking gut health at Roost on Wednesday, the 25th of May. Her new book will be available. So anybody who's coming, who's watching this, will be able to purchase her book there on the night. Simeon, Christine's son, will be there with some fermented foods. We've got fermented foods there as well. It's going to be a fantastic evening. So as that talk will be on gut health, let's get into it now. Now, Christine, gut health seems to be, it's kind of becoming the catchphrase. Yeah. Everybody is talking about gut health, but I can be honest, there's not many people that I know that can actually then explain to me what that means.
Well, I think, the research over 20 years, genomic testing, we now have a lot more information about what effectively is what we call the microbiome. Now, we have about 100 trillion bacteria in our guts. That's 10 times more cells than we have in our body. So we are really a sort of living microbe, quite frankly. And these bacteria live in association with us, a lot of the time helping us and facilitating our survival, whether that's absorbing nutrients, supporting our immune system, modulating us from the outdoor toxins that we have. It has a profound influence on everything and every body system. And I think as the genomic work has sort of almost progressed exponentially, we're actually discovering more about the role these bacteria in particular, and yeast as well, have in influencing our health and longevity. And I think that's why it's becoming more on trend, because we're discovering more. But really, if you look at every culture, they were supporting their gut health through numerous ways, including the foods that they ate, for centuries. This isn't actually new, but it's more the medical field have discovered almost, I suppose, more of the mechanisms around as well, how these microbiome interact with us. I mean, when you look at your gut, it's 200 square meters in size.
That's intestinal tract, basically? Small intestine, large intestine. Is that my full gut?
Sorry?
So when you're talking about gut health, are we talking about literally our intestinal tract? Small intestine, large intestine?
Our small intestine, and we're talking about our colon. Now, the most of the bacteria is more in the colon. That's not to say that there isn't any in the small intestine. There's still quite a few billion, particularly in the lower part, which is the ileum. And remember, of course, we have bacteria in our mouths, we have it on our skin, we have bacteria everywhere. It's not just within our gut, but that is the biggest place where we do have our microbiome. And they are, if you think about it, whatever we eat, the main interaction is going to be with that, what we eat, whether that's a toxin, whether that's a food, and these microbiome, because they are almost our first line of defense, but also our first type of interaction that we have. And it's only when we have some sort of compromise in the gut that pathogens will enter from what we call the lumen, which is the big tube, which is our gut, into our bloodstream. And once that happens, our immune system has to make a choice. Is this something that is nourishing and I don't need to be worried about it? So, for example, nutrients from food. Or is this a pathogen or something I don't recognize that I need to attack? And that's when our body will start to launch an immune response. So, things can go wrong with our gut.
So you're saying about an immune response. They're talking about how our immunity in general is linked to the gut. So we were just talking about immunity as in being outside and exposing ourselves to different things. Is that then building up that good environment in our gut going to build our general immunity?
Well, what it's doing is, so we have immune cells throughout our body, but particularly there is, of the key ones like the lymphocytes, we've got 70% of that tissue is in the gut. So it's residing in the gut. And of course, if you think about it, it's there for a reason, because that's our first exposure to a lot of pathogens. Not all, obviously we can get pathogens through our skin,
Yeah.
But it's the major one, and we're eating every day, we're taking in toxins, we're breathing stuff in. So in terms of immune response, and I like to refer it to rather immune response rather than boosting immunity, because if I had an autoimmune disease, the last thing I want to do is boost it. I don't want to boost it. I want to give my body back tolerance. And what tolerance means is you respond when it's appropriate and you don't respond when it's also appropriate. So often nutritionists and functional practitioners will talk about how can we restore a tolerance so that we only respond when we should. If you've got any allergy, eczema, psoriasis, hay fever, hives, if you've got any autoimmune disease, if you've got any inflammation, that's a sign that the immune system is out of whack and it's responding when it perhaps shouldn't be. So in order to reduce those conditions or alleviate them or even reverse them, we have to gain back that tolerance. And one of the best ways we can do that is work on those microbiome who are influencing 70% of the lymphocytes and our immune cells.
Okay. So there was an article, well, I say they're talking about immunity, gut health and immunity. They're also talking about the gut health and the gut as the new brain.
Well, and that's because our neurological system, our nervous system is all connected, and we have what's called an enteric nervous system. That just means we have a nervous system in the gut. And so, which makes sense, when you're stressed, what often happens? You feel you've got cramps, you feel sick, you might feel hungry. Some people don't, they feel like they're going to run to the toilet. That's influenced by our thoughts, which is then connected through what's called the vagus nerve. So it's a nerve to the gut. So they are absolutely connected, and that's just a physiological thing. It's nothing, weird or extraneous. We have a vagus nerve.
Yes.
An enteric nervous system, and that's in the gut. So it then makes sense to say, well, if that gut is not malfunctioning, but disturbed, that could, for some people, affect how they think and they feel. And again, serotonin, which is our feel-good neurotransmitter, most of that's produced in the gut. So if it's produced in the gut, then, and something happens in our gut and we don't produce as much, then surely that will affect, our mood. So there's a lot of good research now.
Because I'm reading a book at the moment, and I can say I've only just started it, it's by Dr. Kelly Brogan.
Yes.
And it's the links again with depression and all these, and dementia and things like that are all kind of again coming back to your nutrition and your microbiome and how these things are all so intertwined that it's
to be honest, of wine, yourself a glass of kefir, because that's going to have a far greater effect on your mood. And again, I work with children that may have behavioural problems, maybe maybe have, will look at is their gut okay? And obviously there are also foods that we now know when amino acids attach onto opioid receptors in the brain, particularly gluten, particularly dairy, but also soya and corn. And by doing so, they actually can change our mood and our behavior, to the point that some people will actually say to me, I actually feel I'm addicted to gluten. And they probably are, because every time they eat gluten, they're producing these glutamorphins, which then attach onto their brain receptors and make them feel good. You know, an endorphin is like when we take a dose of morphine, we feel great. You know, when we take it, I mean, afterwards we'll have a low, but, you know, wow, this stuff is good, you know. I mean, I remember, you know, after my big operation, when I had some of my bowel taken out and I was given pethidine for pain, I felt fantastic. It was like, hey, you know, it was mucking around with my brain.
Yes.
And, you know, certain foods that we eat can do exactly the same thing, because they're broken down and you get these morphines. I mean, we can test for those now. We can do Thyrox testing and test for those. So, but yeah, I mean, you know, what we eat can have a profound effect on our brain health. And part of that is because of what happens at the gut level.
So how do I know then if I have gut health problems? So Joe Blogs on the street, how do they know whether healing their gut is something that they need to be worried about doing?
Yeah, so the first thing is, you know, we know between 5 and 20% of the population will have IBS. So if you've got IBS, you've probably been to your doctor for the last 10 years complaining of cramping, abdominal pains, constipation, diarrhea, you feel heavy after eating, you feel bloated, blah, blah, blah. So those people obviously know they've got some sort of digestive disorder. But what we also know is that if there is some sort of inflammatory response in the body, so aching joints, fatigue, low energy, low mood, depression, foggy head, migraines, headaches, all of these can be, not always, but can be linked to a dysregulated gut.
And will autoimmune conditions be in as well?
I mean, what we now know from a lot of the good researchers, particularly in Italy, they are effectively saying that for a lot of people, the precursor, so before you get an autoimmune disease, it is likely you will have something called leaky gut. You will have a breakdown in the gut barrier, which allows proteins that shouldn't be getting through into the bloodstream, into the bloodstream. The body mounts an immune reaction, so then you get inflammation. And then it says, you know what, these amino acid sequences of these things I'm attacking, they look really similar to my brain tissue, my skin tissue, my organs, my joint tissue, my connective tissue, whatever it is, and will then start attacking that. And that's the start of an autoimmune. Autoimmune means itself, you're attacking yourself.
Yes.
And that could happen in many, many different ways and in many different body systems. Again, we can test for that. I can track auto-antibodies in all your tissues and organs now. And what we found is that the test will highlight these auto-antibodies 10 to 15 years before you manifest in the disease. So they looked at blood samples of, it was actually people in the army in the States, because when you sign up in the States for the army or whatever, they will take your blood every year. They'll take your blood and they'll bank it. And so what some clever researchers did was they said, you know what, let's see these guys who then went on to develop lupus disease, which is an autoimmune disease. Let's see if we can detect antibodies. And they went back on all the blood samples and they tested all these guys from the army. And they found that they could detect these antibodies to lupus 10 to 15 years before these guys were diagnosed with lupus and showed any signs and symptoms. Wow. So a lot of the researchers said, well, if we can do this can we arrest autoimmunity by doing something 10 to 15 years as soon as we see those antibodies? And the answer is yes. If we heal the gut and we lower inflammatory response, then potentially we can arrest and stop this person ever getting that disease. Now, that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, no kidding.
And now, thankfully, through functional medicine, we have the tools to run these tests, and these are blood laboratory tests, and to help people identify effectively their weak area or their weak spot, or where their autoimmune antibodies may be starting to manifest.
Now, if you can find it after 15 years before, if you have gotten to the point, is there a chance of reversing by gut healing?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, funny enough, I was with Tom O'Brien yesterday, Sunday, yeah, and who's going to be running a huge autoimmune summit in September. And so he was interviewing me. And one of the reasons he was interviewing me was because we did that in Isaac. So Isaac is one of my twin boys. At the age of 2, he was diagnosed with linear IgA bullous disease, which is an autoimmune disease. Now, bear in mind, this was 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. You know, the research on autoimmunity wasn't as strong, but I still knew from my research and my training that there was likely to be a link, for example, with his gut, but also gluten, particularly because gluten is a problem for me and some of the other members in the family. Okay. So he was taken down to Great Ormond Street. They didn't know what to do. Partly because they rarely see this condition at all. He was covered from head to toe with blisters, painful blisters, screaming, 2 years old.
What brought them on? Like, literally, would he eat something and that caused it? Would he be exposed to something that would cause them?
Well, we don't know. But what we do know with autoimmune diseases is that you normally have a genetic susceptibility. So you're born with genes that will make you more susceptible, and then there'll be some sort of environmental trigger. And that environmental trigger could be anything. But in my case, I suspected it was probably gluten and potentially some other cross-reactive food. Now, it could have been gluten and other foods and something else. We just don't know. Mm-hmm. But what I did was I said, well, thank you very much. I don't really want the steroids, which is all they would offer me. I'm going to do some gut healing and take out gluten and dairy. Within 2 weeks, he was healed. It's never come back. I mean, he occasionally might get a flare-up if he yeah. So, I mean, there was a case where, and I mentioned this to Tom, we were in Turkey and we used a sun cream which inadvertently had wheat germ, which contains gluten. Oh, and you know, it
literally rubbed it all over his body.
We did put it on his body, and you know, a day later or so, he started developing blisters. So you know, it hasn't really happened since. But you know, it's interesting. I've got a very good doctor. I have to say, I've got a really good doctor. And Isaac is given probiotics on prescription. And that, I believe, is what also helps to control it. So I think the combination of these high-strength probiotics, and obviously he takes things like fermented foods, you know, all the time in my house, but also that and sticking to a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. I mean, we're pretty much, you know, he's pretty much paleo, as you know, yeah. is what helps him. And, you know, he's a 12-year-old full of health, no signs of the autoimmune disease. So, yes, you can reverse it. Absolutely. I've had clients who have been diagnosed with MS, and we've done gut healing. We've done, you know, loads of intervention for different things and certain triggers and certain foods. And they are now being told by their consultant, I'm not sure we actually got this diagnosis right because you haven't got any symptoms. You know, you can believe what you like, but, you know, I know the power of food.
But if they go back and they decide to just completely undo all that good work with all the good foods and gut healing that they've done, all those symptoms will reappear.
I don't know. They've never wanted to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in full health. So why would you change to get unhealthy? It's just ridiculous.
No, exactly.
You know, I don't want people to be listening to this and thinking all I need to do is change my diet. That's not true. You don't. We know for a lot of autoimmune diseases, there are many other triggers, and that can be viruses, bacteria, yeast. It can also be toxins in our environment. Even the silicone breast implants have now been associated with certain autoimmune conditions. So there's a huge number of factors. And what we know is with autoimmunity, you have a gene susceptibility, you have environmental triggers, and the combination then causes gut permeability, and then you start getting the cascade of toxins, a build-up of toxic loads, and circulating antigens, which then causes the immune response. So, you know, please don't listen to this and think, oh, all I need to do is take out gluten. Well, for some people, yes, it might be, but for other people,
that might just be the beginning of the road.
And that's why, please, work with someone who's qualified, work with a functional practitioner who really knows what to be doing, because these are serious conditions. And, you know, if someone's just saying to you, just drink a cup of kefir and you will be fine, I wish it was that simple. But for a lot of people where their health has deteriorated and their gut barrier is not healthy, you need to do a lot more than that to get your gut back.
Now, in terms of gut healing, there's lots of different things that you hear about in terms of things you should take. So we've already mentioned fermented foods. We've mentioned probiotics, bone broth. Now, you go down to the supermarket. Now, I know full well, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, but all on the shelves, there's your Yakults and there's your Activias and there's loads of probiotic drinks. There's also, when you walk into most health food shops, a huge range of probiotic options you can have. There's also fermented foods. So let's start with fermented foods.
Yeah.
What benefit do fermented foods have? Why are they something that are good to consume when healing your gut? Or are they right away?
Right, so it depends what you mean by fermented foods, because, you know, I could walk into my local supermarket and pick up a tub of yogurt. Is that going to do me much good? Unlikely. I mean, it might have a few bacteria in there. Are they the ones that are particularly going to help me? Very difficult to know. Obviously, there are certain good brands and some brands that are so laden in sugar, I should think they're a complete waste of your time. And remember that when we're talking about healthy bacteria, we're talking about millions of different strains and species. And when you look at the medical research, there are specific strains and specific species that can be beneficial. So if I am working with someone in my clinic, I'm going to be using certain strains that I know from the research are going to benefit them.
Now, will different strains benefit different people? Or, because like we talked about on one of the seminars that you were in, we were talking about children's health, about flip-flopping I can't even say them.
Yeah.
And then
so if you're someone who's got colitis, then we know that there are certain strains that are beneficial for ulcerative colitis compared to IBS, for example. And that's why you need to be working with someone who actually understands the medical research. But together, fermented foods, again, chops and sauerkraut, that's a complete waste of my time. And it says raw, and you know, it hasn't been heat treated. As soon as you start heating either yogurt or kefir or sauerkraut, those bacteria aren't going to be there for much longer. So, you know, don't walk into your local supermarket, pick up a tub of sauerkraut and think it's going to benefit you. It might taste good, and, you know, it's got acidity, digestion a bit, you know.
You're freezing a little bit.
To make their own.
Yes, it's not difficult to make your own, is it? As well, you have recipes, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely, and I've got tons of recipes in the gut health book, from, you know, red cabbage sauerkraut to ordinary sauerkraut to pickled veg to kimchi. And whenever we are fermenting foods, we're inoculating them probably with a whole wealth of different probiotics and beneficial yeast. And we know that the combination, say in milk kefir or coconut kefir, compared to kombucha, compared to sauerkraut, is very different. So the idea is that you, on a regular basis, daily, take different types of fermented foods. And this is something that, cultures have been doing for years, and different cultures have their different fermented drinks or their different fermented foods that they may be consuming on a long-term basis. And the idea is, if you want a good diversity of flora, and that's what we're really talking about, is you want a good range of different flora, then eat a different range of fermented foods daily. Now, what's also interesting is that we can affect the diversity of our flora simply by also changing the rest of our diet, because these probiotics, these beneficial bacteria, they are feeding on fermentable fibers. So if we change our diet, literally within 24 hours, we can change the growth of different bacteria. So they've done studies, particularly again on mice, where they said, okay, we'll give one lot a high fat, high sugar diet, and we'll give another lot a very plant-based, lower fat diet, and they completely change the whole bacterial levels. And that can make you inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. Very 24 hours, that was 24 hours. Yeah. So again, we know that a meat eater's diet is very different from a plant eater's diet. Now, it's not to say that one is better than the other, although actually those on the high sugar, high fat diet, it was a lot worse. It was much more pro-inflammatory. But it's more making the point that, again, it's never too late to change your diet and to have a profound effect on your gut health. And simply changing your diet in terms of giving it the proper fiber that the bacteria needs is really important long term. And what happens is those bacteria feed on these fibers and they produce something else. They produce short chain fatty acids. Now, these short chain fatty acids, some people may have heard of them, propionate, acetate, butyrate. These are fuel for the colon cells, so they help support our gut. They're also anti-inflammatory. And we know, particularly if someone's got an inflammatory bowel disease, giving yourself a supplement of butyrate can be very, very beneficial. So there is, other things involved, not just, I must take fermented foods. That's fine, but they're going to be fairly transient and you'll, get rid of them and then you'll be back to square one. You need to feed and nurture the population that's present. And the only way really you can do that is to give it fermented foods. Then fermentable fibers to feed them.
Now, fermented food in any way processed in a prebiotic or a probiotic?
So a prebiotic is the fiber to feed those beneficial bacteria. A probiotic is those beneficial bacteria.
Okay.
You generally need both. Now, it doesn't mean you have to take a supplement with both of those, but if you're just taking a probiotic, whether that's through food or whether a supplement, you need to give your body the foods to feed on. And that is why people that follow a very low FODMAP diet for too long or a very low carbohydrate diet for too long can find their beneficial bacteria to be low.
Okay.
And that's very relevant for paleo listeners, because some paleo people do cut the carbs so much and the fermentable fibers so much that actually their levels of good bacteria start to fall. So it doesn't mean you can't do a low carb diet. It just means you need to feed it with good bacteria, but also with fermentable fibers. So that could be loads of leafy greens. It could be that you take chia, psyllium, flaxseed. So it doesn't mean, oh, are you saying I can't do a low carb diet? No, I'm not saying that at all. But you need to give it the right fermentable fibers. And if you don't expect your beneficial bacteria to be particularly high if I ever did a stool test.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Well, I don't want to go into too much more detail because one, our gut seminar, and two, I can hear my speaker stuff go a bit funny.
Fine.
Can you hear me, or is it
a little bit? You are starting to break up a bit, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. So we are going to have a part 2. So we will finish our gut health talk there for today, because we will carry on our next blab, which, all being well, will be Tuesday the 28th of June, as long as everybody's schedules are good. And also we will be able to then bring any feedback that we get from the gut health seminar and share some of that information with you guys. Look at this a bit further and go from there.
Yeah, that sounds
great with you.
That sounds great to me.
Excellent. Well, thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Christine, for joining us and co-hosting with me. We will see you guys back here next month. You'll be able to watch this on the Primal Roost website. You'll be able to see it on YouTube and find it on Facebook and Twitter as well. So take care, get lots of vitamin D while the sun is shining, and we'll see you soon.